Good morning everyone, my name is Joel Kane. I'm a 6th year JCU medical student based in Darwin. Today I'll be presenting to you an overview of my honours project, which you can see will explore the impact of gestational age and mode of delivery on childhood development in the Northern Territory. For this I've been fortunate to partner with the Menzies School of Health Research, and in today's presentation I'll cover the project's background, aims, clinical significance and proposed methodology, before finishing with some logistical considerations of the research. So I'll begin with a quick background into the project for those of you who may be unfamiliar with any of the concepts to be discussed. As mentioned, this project aims to explore how differences in gestational age and/or delivery mode change children's development when measured in later schooling years. Therefore, the two modifiable variables I hope to explore are firstly gestational age, which refers to the length of pregnancy in weeks. A normal pregnancy ranges from 37 weeks to 41 weeks and 6 days, which is called term. Births are categorised as pre, early, full or post-term, depending on their length relative to this. And the second variable is mode of delivery, which can be either spontaneous vaginal deliveries, births requiring medical instrumentation such as forceps, or caesarean section deliveries. Importantly, growing research in this area show that more parents and clinicians are performing more so-called elective deliveries to have their babies at predetermined dates. These require births before spontaneous labour, which is therefore at an earlier gestational age and achieved by labour induction or caesarean sections. And whilst we know that extremely premature or late gestational ages may result in poorer educational outcomes, whether or not this occurs during early term elective deliveries and the effect that mode has during such deliveries is currently not well understood. So before going into further detail about how this project will aim to answer these questions, I'll first outline the existing literature on the topic, firstly studies comparing gestational age with educational outcomes, and then delivery mode with education. So beginning with those studies that compare the effects of gestational age on education, the majority of our knowledge is summarised in 3 systematic reviews by Murray, Twilhar and Chan, which included 7, 17 and 18 studies respectively. Within these reviews, substantial between-study heterogeneity existed, which resulted in conflicting findings. For example, whilst Twilhar and Chan showed that preterm children have lower cognitive performance than their term counterparts, Murray found no differences in these outcomes, though the authors note that the risk of bias was high in the included studies, which may explain the differences. Nonetheless, both Murray and Chan present that early-term children underperformed in most outcomes compared with their full-term counterparts. A final important study to discuss here was a recent paper by Hanley et al., who found that in New South Wales, Aboriginal children had a higher risk of developmental vulnerability across all gestational ages. However, this was largely accounted for by socioeconomic disadvantage. So overall, it appears there's a dose-dependent U-shaped relationship between gestational age and educational vulnerability, though this is not congruent across all studies. Moving to the effects of delivery mode on education, a similar heterogeneity exists. Although no systematic reviews were found here, 3 studies by Peters, Smithers and Bentley are important to discuss. Peters, for example, found that children born by caesarean section delivery were at a statistically significantly increased risk for certain health conditions which are known precipitants of impaired educational performance, though this outcome was not demonstrated. Furthermore, Smithers found that both the raw and augmented data suggested little differences in school achievement between children born by caesarean versus vaginal birth. Contrastingly, Bentley showed increased developmental vulnerability with decreasing gestational age as well as with labour inductions or pre-labour caesareans. Therefore, similar to the effect of gestation, literature on the impact of delivery mode on education is not entirely consistent, and I was also unable to identify any upcoming studies on Prospero that aim to clarify this. So I hope that by now you can see some of the gaps that are present in the current literature, and these include whether there is in fact a difference in the educational performance with different modes of deliveries, exactly how the U-shaped graph of gestational age against educational performance is formed in different populations, including the NT, how Indigenous status contributes towards the effects, and whether NT data are similar to national and international counterparts. And an understanding of these questions is hugely important, as not only does it investigate factors which apply to every child born, but also the small individual effects that result from changing such variables can become very significant when it occurs across an entire population. Furthermore, it can help us better predict children's growth and developmental trajectories. Moreover, the project may help inform us of the risks of early-term elective deliveries. And finally, it gives us data specific to the NT population, which sees a large array of rural, remote, Indigenous and tropical health. And because of this, health data often differ from national and international reports, and we hope to define whether this is the case in our obstetric and paediatric populations too. So now that we have an understanding of the problem and what's been done before, I'll next discuss the project's aims, objectives, as well as their significance. So firstly, the overarching aim of the project will be to explore the impact of gestational age and mode of delivery on childhood development in the Northern Territory. In doing so, we also aim to determine if Indigenous children are more or less susceptible to such developmental effects, investigate the developmental impacts of early-term elective deliveries in the Northern Territory, compare NT data with national and international standards as mentioned previously, and finally to further refine our understanding of each individual child's developmental trajectory. To answer these aims, the plan is to use available data in the Menzies Health repository to provide a population-based analysis. Please note, I'll explain this repository in further detail in the upcoming methods section. Nonetheless, the aims will be met through the study's research question, which was made using the PECOT method for available data within the repository. This formulated a final research question which reads, for children born in the Northern Territory between the years of 2003 and 2008, did births by spontaneous vaginal delivery at full term, when compared with all other delivery modes and gestational ages, result in different rates of developmental vulnerability, as measured in the AEDC and NAPLAN scores, including when stratified by Indigenous status? Given previous data, it's hypothesised that a U-shaped distribution of gestational age and educational vulnerability will be formed, and this may represent early-term elective deliveries as more at risk than full-term deliveries. Further, it's hypothesised that Indigenous children will be at a higher risk across all gestational ages, though this difference could be explained by confounding variables such as maternal education, rurality, and smoking. Also, it's hypothesised that different delivery modes will be associated with varying levels of vulnerability. And finally, it's hypothesised NT children will be at a higher risk than interstate equivalents. So based on these results, the clinical consequences and significance could therefore extend to informing clinical practice of the risks and benefits of elective deliveries in a time where increasing amounts are being performed. And importantly, the study can also help to understand how a child's developmental trajectory can be better predicted, and in doing so, we can recognise where policy changes can occur to best support these children. So next I'll outline how this project seeks to achieve these aims and objectives. As mentioned earlier, this project is in collaboration with the Menzies School of Health Research. Here, researchers have compiled a linked unit-level data repository from multiple sources between the years of 1994 and 2017. This provides researchers with de-identified information on NT individuals' data from a variety of territory and national sources, allowing analyses of how these interact. For my project, I seek to analyse information based on hospital and perinatal health records, the AEDC and NAPLAN results. The majority of information about births in the NT is captured directly in electronic format as entered by midwives shortly after the birth of a baby. This also captures antenatal information such as smoking and alcohol use during pregnancy, maternal medical conditions, and pregnancy complications. Child development will be measured through results of a national census called the Australian Early Development Census, or AEDC. The AEDC is collected nationally every 3 years and is a questionnaire that is completed by teachers for children attending their first year of full-time schooling. The AEDC has 5 developmental domains, and children who score in the lowest 10% of the population are considered developmentally vulnerable, which will be the study's primary outcome. And education as an outcome will be measured by NAPLAN scores, which are results of a test given to children in Year 3 covering reading, writing, spelling, grammar and numeracy. Children performing at or below the national minimum standard, which are bands 1 and 2, demonstrate only basic numeracy and literacy skills for their grade and often require classroom support. This is therefore a useful measure of child vulnerability. This data has therefore been pre-collected from a variety of sources. However, as a result of this, does not allow for a great deal of flexibility in the study's design and presents some limitations such as data completeness and accuracy. Nonetheless, the NT dataset is considered to be one of the most complete in the country, and this project will use matched data for birth cohorts from 2003, which is when the AEDC results are available, to 2008, as this is the last cohort with NAPLAN data. The sample size with complete outcomes is estimated to be around 3,000 individuals. At this stage, the plan is to conduct a project as a population-based study using routinely collected and contemporaneously recorded administrative data. It will use outcome-dependent multivariate analysis with logistical regression based on unit-level linked data. Furthermore, progressive backward elimination of potential confounders based on a change in the adjusted associations of more than 10% will be used to provide adjusted developmental outcomes for gestational age and mode of birth, both individually and then combined. As a result, this will allow for comparison to existing studies, as well as to obtain the adjusted relative risks, or ARRs, of different gestational ages and modes of birth. When combined, this can then be used to describe the ARRs of early planned births in elective deliveries. Now I'll finish by briefly discussing some logistical considerations of the project. Firstly, as the data is already collected and ethical approval is given for the original project, these otherwise time-consuming parts of the research are already complete. For this reason, despite expected ongoing refinements, this project is likely to be completed within the 2-year timeline. Nonetheless, difficulties that could arise include having incomplete or incorrectly recorded data, which could result in challenges to the analyses. Furthermore, the actual number of matched data may present a smaller than expected sample. This has already been encountered, leading to a smaller than previously thought sample. However, it's still expected to be in the thousands and therefore likely to produce novel data on the NT's obstetric and paediatric populations. And finally, I'd like to conclude by mentioning the ethical considerations surrounding the project's focus on Indigenous children. For this, we aim to not merely present any discrepancies that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous children, but understand the reasons why they exist. This is because it's important to not simply identify problems by race alone, but instead portray the data within the context of how this affects a child's developmental trajectory. In doing so, it justifies exploring the problems faced, as well as solutions that can be used to help these vulnerable children. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you've gained some insight into this exciting project.